The Power Rangers Turbo movie was the least successful film in the entire franchise, and today I want to analyze with you the reasons why this happened. The reality is that it may seem strange that this film failed, since it featured several of the same Rangers who appeared in the 1995 film, which was the most successful film in the franchise. If the Power Rangers Turbo movie had almost the same actors as the most successful movie in the franchise, why did it fail? Perhaps this is a question you have thought about before, but the answer requires a little analysis, and the best way to do that is by comparing both movies. These two movies are basically the most successful and the least successful, and they also share the same actors. The characters who appeared in both films were Tommy, Adam, Kimberly, and Rocky, as well as Bulk and Skull, but we won't talk about them since they don't change anything in this analysis. The Power Rangers Turbo movie was the beginning of that same season, so in this film we saw a new theme with new powers and new costumes. This also included a new villain, a new story, and some changes to the team. This was one of the first things that affected this movie, as the Power Rangers Turbo series was one of the least successful, and although there are many reasons for this, we are going to focus on the things that affected the series and the movie as well. The 1995 movie was also a change because even though that movie is not part of the canon, it was basically similar to the beginning of the third season and the new Ninjetti powers. Despite this, in this movie we saw the mighty Morphin theme, something that was global and loved by many people. In the Turbo movie, the theme was completely new, so no one was familiar with all the new things that a theme entails. One of the worst things about the Power Rangers Turbo theme has always been the Zords, and that is that no one liked the idea of the Zords being cars. These cars had some changes so they wouldn't look like normal cars, but that was never really enough to make them feel like powerful machines that can transform. On top of that, let's be honest, the design of those cars was very ugly, so they didn't even have a basic design that was elegant. We already know what many fans are going to say. They're going to say that it's the Sentai's fault, and that's obvious, but if Power Rangers decided to use those Zords, then it's also Power Rangers' fault. Let's remember that every year the Power Rangers franchise continued to buy new Japanese scenes, so they were always changing, and this became a risk. Imagine losing a lot of money because your customers didn't like the design you bought from someone else. This is something you can't control very much, and it's always going to be trial and error. Fans had liked the previous themes, but finally a theme came along that was a disaster, and it was a terrible coincidence that they started that season with a movie. Obviously, at that time, the producers didn't know what was going wrong, which is why they later changed almost all the actors, thinking they simply needed a new cast, when in reality they needed a new theme. The next point we should mention about the failure of the Turbo movie is the story. Although it has some interesting elements, it is too simple. They constructed this story as if they were making an episode of the series, including many childish elements, silly jokes, and few characters. In addition to this, they did not delve very deeply into the history of the new characters, which means we have no connection with them. The story of the 1995 film was very profound, as it begins by connecting us with the villain's story, then breaks our hearts when we see Zordon on the verge of death, and we also see the Rangers struggling to defeat such a powerful villain. This brings me to my next point. The fights we saw in both movies are very different, and this also greatly affected the final result. In the Turbo movie, we saw very few fights. The Rangers were almost always solving other problems that were less important or did not require a battle. In addition to this, the few fights we did see were a disaster, with incorrect camera angles that made the actors look ridiculous and did not add anything epic to the scene. Something that was very special in the 1995 film is that all the fights were very special because the camera angles were perfect, the lighting was always excellent and in keeping with the style of each situation, and the enemies were stronger in each battle. If we look at each battle in the 1995 film, we realize that as the film progressed, each enemy became stronger and stronger, adding difficulty to the Rangers' mission. This makes the heroes look more and more powerful as they continue to level up, and at the same time keeps us very attentive to the story, as we always think that each fight is impossible to win. This brings us to the next point of analysis: the villains we saw in each film and the disaster they caused in Power Rangers Turbo. At this point, we're going to start backwards. First, we'll analyze the villains from the 1995 film and then compare them to those from Turbo. In the 1995 film, we had the most famous villains in the entire franchise: Rita, Lord Zed, and Golder, three Power Rangers icons, but at that time, they were simply the villains we knew. Rita and Lord Zed were known for being the most powerful villains at the time, so the best way to make the new villain look superior was for him to defeat Rita and Lord Zed very easily. This is exactly what they did, and on top of that, they had the villain almost kill Zordon, someone who has always felt like a father to all the fans. They only needed these two actions to make the new villain look like a ruthless and powerful being who had all the tools necessary to defeat the Power Rangers. Remember that in the series, the Power Rangers have always won quite easily, and that has always made the villain seem less powerful, so in this movie, that changed completely. However, in the Turbo movie, we were never shown any of the new villain's powers. She was simply an evil pirate who wanted to awaken a monster that was indeed powerful. On top of that, this villain was almost a joke, as she was always making silly jokes, had an exaggerated personality, and wasn't scary. The only real villain was the final monster, which had a spectacular design, but due to the poor visual quality of the film, this monster just looked like a ridiculous costume. The worst part is that later on, they used that same costume to represent Dark Spectre in another season, because the producers knew they had wasted that costume in this film. The last point we need to analyze is the quality of the entire film, and we must start by talking about its budget. We all know that the budget can greatly affect a production, and although we have sometimes had spectacular projects that have been made on a small budget, the reality is that this is not the norm. The 1995 film was made with $15 million, and the Turbo film was made with $8 million, basically half the budget of the first film. We all know that these actors were not paid much money, so most of that budget was spent on production and the creative side. All of these actors did a great job, and they were never to blame for the failure of Power Rangers Turbo, as is evident when comparing the two films. The visual quality of the 1995 film was excellent, with perfect lighting and impeccable colorization, and although the CGI could have been better, the other aspects were very good. However, the Turbo movie had the worst camera angles, horrible lighting, and the special effects are almost non-existent. Worst of all were the sets, as the 1995 movie had spectacular sets and incredible scenery, but the scenery in the Turbo movie seemed to be made of cheap materials and low-cost locations.